They never knew how heavy mornings were for me. From the outside, my life looked ordinary, nothing dramatic, nothing tragic enough to raise concern. I woke up, got dressed, showed up where I was expected to be. I spoke when spoken to. I smiled when it was appropriate. I nodded like I understood how life was supposed to work. People assumed I was fine because I didn't complain. They mistook my silence for strength, not realizing it was survival. The truth was, my days began long before sunrise, not because I was productive or ambitious, but because my mind refused to rest. Sleep had become a shallow visitor, brief, unreliable, and always interrupted by thoughts I couldn't turn off. Regrets replayed themselves in my head like scenes from a movie I never asked to watch. Missed chances. Wrong decisions. Words I swallowed instead of speaking. Dreams I postponed until someday, a day that never seemed to arrive. I would lie there staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the world waking up, wondering how everyone else made life look so easy. How did they carry their responsibilities without looking exhausted? How did they chase dreams without fear choking them halfway there? And why did I feel like I was constantly running, yet never moving forward? I learned early on that struggling quietly was safer than struggling out loud. When you open up, people listen at first. Then they get tired. They offer advice you didn't ask for, solutions that don't fit your reality, or worse, comparisons that make you feel weak for not coping better. So I stopped explaining. I stopped sharing. I folded my pain neatly inside myself and carried it like a secret no one needed to know. During the day, I played my role well. I was reliable. I was strong. I was the one who handled things without making a fuss. If something went wrong, I fixed it. If someone needed help, I showed up. I became so good at being there for others that no one thought to ask who was there for me. But strength, when it's forced, becomes heavy. Every smile felt rehearsed. Every "I'm fine" tasted like a lie that stuck to my tongue. I watched people celebrate small wins, while I questioned whether my biggest efforts even mattered. I watched others get recognized for things I had worked just as hard for or harder yet somehow remained invisible. And each time, I told myself it didn't hurt. That I didn't need validation. That one day, it would make sense. Inside, though, something was cracking. There were moments, small, quiet moments, when the weight became unbearable. Standing alone in a crowded room. Sitting on a bus, watching the city blur past, feeling like I didn't belong anywhere it stopped. Scrolling through my phone late at night, comparing my behind-the-scenes chaos to everyone else's perfectly edited lives. I wondered if I was falling behind, or if I had already been left behind and just hadn't noticed yet. Responsibility sat on my shoulders like a constant pressure. Not just responsibility for work or family, but responsibility for holding myself together. I couldn't afford to fall apart. Too many people depended on the version of me that looked okay. So I became that version, even when it cost me pieces of myself. I didn't cry often, not because I wasn't hurting, but because I had trained myself not to. Tears felt like weakness, and weakness felt dangerous. If I let myself feel too much, I was afraid I wouldn't be able to stop. Afraid that once I cracked, everything I had been holding up would collapse with me. So I carried on. Each day blurred into the next, marked by routine instead of purpose. I told myself this was temporary. That everyone struggles. That this was just the part of the story no one talks about. I clung to the idea that suffering quietly meant it would count for something later, that endurance would eventually turn into reward. Still, doubt crept in during the quiet hours. What if this was it? What if all my effort led nowhere? What if being strong was just another way of disappearing? I didn't know the answers yet. All I knew was that beneath the calm surface everyone saw, there was a storm constantly threatening to break through. A weight pressing down on my chest. A voice whispering that I was tired of being brave in silence. They never saw me struggle. At that point, neither did they see how close I was to breaking. The breaking point didn't arrive with drama. There was no single moment where everything collapsed at once. Instead, it came quietly, disguised as exhaustion. The kind that sleep can't fix. The kind that settles into your bones and makes even simple decisions feel heavy. I started losing things, not all at once, and not in ways people noticed. Opportunities slipped through my fingers because I hesitated too long. Relationships faded because I didn't have the energy to keep explaining myself. Confidence eroded slowly, like something valuable being stolen a little at a time. No alarms went off. No one warned me. Life just kept moving, and I struggled to keep up. Failure became familiar. I failed privately, where no one could see me fall. I'd sit alone, replaying conversations in my head, wondering what I should have said differently. I'd stare at messages I never sent and applications I never submitted, convincing myself I wasn't ready yet. Deep down, I knew the truth. I was afraid. Afraid of trying and confirming every doubt I already had about myself. There were days I felt invisible even to my own life. I showed up physically, but my mind was somewhere else, stuck between regret and fear. People talked to me, laughed around me, made plans for the future, and I nodded along as if I belonged in those conversations. Inside, I felt like an observer watching everyone else live while I stood behind glass. The worst part wasn't the struggle, it was the loneliness of it. When things went wrong, there was no one to catch me. No safety net. No comforting words that truly understood the weight I carried. I had trained everyone to believe I was fine, so when I wasn't, I didn't know how to ask for help without feeling like a fraud. How do you suddenly admit you're drowning when you've spent years convincing people you can swim? At night, the thoughts grew louder. Maybe you're not talented enough. Maybe you waited too long. Maybe this is all you'll ever be. Those thoughts didn't scream, they whispered. And somehow, that made them harder to fight. They followed me into quiet moments, into empty rooms, into the pauses between tasks. I began to question everything, my choices, my worth, my future. Even the dreams I once protected started to feel childish, unrealistic, embarrassing. Some nights, quitting felt like relief. Not quitting life, just quitting the fight. Quitting the pressure to be more, do more, become something meaningful. I imagined a version of myself who expected nothing, wanted nothing, and therefore couldn't be disappointed. The idea scared me, but it also tempted me with its promise of peace. I made mistakes during that time. Real ones. I trusted people who saw my vulnerability as an opportunity. I ignored red flags because I was desperate to feel understood. I stayed in places mentally and emotionally where I was shrinking instead of growing. Each mistake added another layer of guilt, another reason to believe my struggles were my own fault. And yet, even at my lowest, something refused to let me disappear. It wasn't hope. Hope felt too fragile back then. It was more like stubbornness, a quiet defiance that lived somewhere deep inside me. A small voice that said, "You've come too far to end here," even when I wasn't sure where here actually was. There were moments I sat in complete stillness, doing nothing, thinking nothing, just trying to breathe through the heaviness. In those moments, I realized how tired I was, not just of failing, but of pretending the failures didn't hurt. Of carrying disappointment alone. Of being strong for an audience that never showed up. No one clapped when I survived those days. No one noticed how hard it was to keep going. The world didn't slow down to acknowledge my struggle. It simply waited, indifferent, while I decided whether I would keep moving or finally let myself fall. And I did fall. Not in a way anyone could see, but in a way that changed me. I hit a quiet bottom, a place where denial stopped working and excuses ran out. A place where I could no longer lie to myself about how lost I felt. It was terrifying, standing there with nothing but my failures and fears for company. But in that darkness, something became clear. If no one was coming to save me, then I would have to decide whether I was worth saving. That question followed me into the next chapter of my life, heavy and unresolved. I didn't have answers yet. I didn't have a plan. All I had was the knowledge that staying where I was meant disappearing completely. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't ready to disappear. No one announces the moment they decide to save themselves. There was no speech. No promise made out loud. Just a quiet shift somewhere inside me, a tired acceptance that staying broken hurt more than trying again. I didn't wake up motivated or confident. I woke up empty, and somehow that emptiness gave me space to begin. I stopped waiting to feel ready. For a long time, I had told myself I needed clarity, confidence, or permission before moving forward. The truth was simpler and harder: I needed discipline. So I started small, so small it almost felt pointless. I fixed my sleep when I could. I showed up on time. I finished things even when I hated them. Progress didn't feel inspiring, it felt mechanical. But it was movement, and movement mattered. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. There was something fragile about this new version of me, something that didn't need opinions or expectations breathing down its neck. I had failed publicly enough in my own mind. This time, I wanted to build quietly, where mistakes could belong only to me. So I worked in the dark, when no one was watching and no one could measure my pace. Some days, I doubted myself the entire time I was working. The voice that once told me to quit hadn't disappeared, it just learned to speak more calmly. It asked smarter questions. Is this really going to change anything? Are you sure you're not wasting time again? I learned to work through those questions without answering them. Consistency became my rebellion. I started learning from my failures instead of using them as proof that I was incapable. I looked honestly at where I went wrong, not to punish myself, but to understand myself. Patterns emerged. Fear disguised as patience. Comfort disguised as stability. I had been protecting myself from disappointment by never fully committing to anything. Seeing that truth hurt, but it also gave me control. There were nights I wanted to stop. I'd sit alone, exhausted, wondering why I was putting in effort no one could see. Nothing dramatic had changed. My life still looked the same from the outside. The gap between where I was and where I wanted to be felt overwhelming. And in those moments, I had to remind myself that this wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. This was about becoming someone I could live with. Slowly, something shifted. I began to trust myself, not because I was succeeding, but because I was showing up. Even on bad days. Especially on bad days. I learned that self-respect isn't built through big wins, it's built through promises kept in private. Every small task completed was a quiet vote for the person I was trying to become. I stopped romanticizing struggle. Pain didn't make me special. Endurance didn't guarantee success. What mattered was learning how to stay present even when progress felt invisible. I stopped asking when things would get better and started asking what I could do next. The future became less frightening when I focused on the next hour instead of the next 5 years. Discipline gave me structure when motivation abandoned me. I created routines not because they were exciting, but because they were reliable. They held me together on days when my thoughts tried to pull me apart. I learned that structure isn't a cage, it's a foundation. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was standing on something solid. There were still setbacks. Still mistakes. Still moments of doubt so loud they almost drowned out everything else. But now, failure didn't feel final. It felt temporary, instructive, survivable. I no longer collapsed under it, I adjusted. The world remained unaware. People continued to see the same version of me. Some even doubted me openly. Others offered advice based on who they thought I was, not who I was becoming. I didn't correct them. I didn't need them to understand. This work wasn't for them. In the quiet, I was rebuilding something I had lost, my sense of agency. I wasn't waiting for permission anymore. I wasn't chasing validation. I was learning to trust process over praise, effort over recognition. And though the results were not yet visible, I could feel the difference inside me, a steadiness that hadn't been there before. I didn't feel successful. But I felt capable. And in the dark, unseen and unapplauded, that was enough to keep going. And then one day, it happened, or at least, that's how it looked to everyone else. From the outside, it seemed sudden. A promotion, recognition, praise, opportunities appearing like magic. People came up to me, smiling, patting my back, telling me how lucky I was. It happened so fast, they said. I always knew you could do it, they cheered. And I smiled, nodded, and said nothing. Because none of it was sudden. None of it came from luck. The truth was invisible. They didn't see the late nights when I cried over mistakes no one else knew I made. They didn't see the mornings I dragged myself out of bed, questioning whether I even deserved to try again. They didn't see the years I spent learning, failing, and trying again in silence. They didn't see the relentless voice in my head that told me I wasn't enough, and how I refused to give it the satisfaction of stopping me. They only saw the results. And I let them. There's a strange kind of freedom in it when no one knows the price you paid. People will celebrate your success, and they will believe it came naturally. They will assume you always had it, that the path was easy. They will tell themselves it's luck, charm, destiny, but they won't know the sweat, the tears, and the broken pieces that held you together long enough to arrive at that moment. I never corrected them. I didn't feel the need to. Explaining the years of struggle would have drained the magic of the moment, and besides, who was it for? Certainly not them. The story was mine alone, and I had earned the right to keep it that way. I remember the first time someone publicly acknowledged me. I smiled as they spoke, hearing only fragments. My mind drifted back to all the silent work I had done, the lonely nights, the mistakes I had swallowed, the doubts I had stared down. They didn't know, couldn't know, and I wasn't about to tell them. And for a moment, I felt pride, not the pride of recognition, but the pride of survival. Because success is not always about being seen, it's about being faithful to yourself when no one else is watching. The rise felt surreal. People treated me differently. Doors opened where walls had stood. I was invited to conversations I had been excluded from. I was given credit where I had been overlooked. And yet, even in the midst of the applause, there was a quiet part of me that stayed tethered to the truth. None of this was sudden. None of this was easy. It had been built brick by brick in the dark. I began to notice a change in how I viewed others' reactions. Some were genuinely happy, some jealous, some skeptical. Some asked questions about my methods, my plans, my secret. I smiled, offering vague answers that satisfied curiosity but never revealed the years of grit behind the curtain. There was power in that. I realized that people rarely need to see the struggle to respect the rise. They admire the result, the confidence, the stability. They are inspired by the visible, not the invisible effort. And I had discovered that my story was mine to shape, not for their understanding, but for my own dignity. And yet, there were moments of loneliness even in the light. Sudden recognition comes with a strange emptiness if no one knows the true path you traveled. I walked into rooms full of congratulations, shaking hands, and smiling faces, while my heart remembered the nights of tears, the quiet hours of questioning, the fear of failing in solitude. It was a secret I carried with me, a private victory hidden within public applause. But that's what made it real. I had survived when survival seemed impossible. I had risen when rising felt like a dream too far away. And no one could take that away, not with praise, not with criticism, not with luck or circumstance. The world only sees what it is ready to see. And sometimes, that's enough. I let them see the rise. I let them believe it was sudden. And in doing so, I protected the sacredness of the struggle, the long, unseen fight that shaped me, strengthened me, and prepared me for this moment. Because I understood something they didn't: the climb matters more than the summit, the nights of doubt more than the days of recognition, and the battles fought in silence more than the cheers of an audience. And when I stood there, in the middle of applause that didn't belong to the struggle, I smiled, not because the world finally saw me, but because I finally saw myself. They never saw me fall. They never saw me doubt. They never saw the hours I spent rebuilding myself from nothing. And that was okay. Because what mattered wasn't their understanding, it was my victory, mine alone. Now I stand taller, and no one truly knows the path I took to get here. It's strange, this sensation of quiet triumph. People see confidence, stability, a person who seems untouchable. They see someone who has it all together, who rises above challenges effortlessly. They see results, but they don't see the years, the nights, the broken pieces I gathered to get here. And I don't correct them. Because there is a power in carrying your own story without applause. There is a freedom in knowing the truth of your struggle, even if the world never acknowledges it. Every bruise I endured, every failure I survived, every moment I wanted to quit but didn't, it belongs to me. And that is enough. I look back, and I see the person I was, exhausted, doubting, invisible, and still stubbornly alive. That person, silent, struggling, unseen, is why I can stand tall today. Every challenge I thought might break me didn't. Every doubt I battled didn't win. Every failure I endured taught me resilience, patience, and self-trust. I have learned that strength doesn't require an audience. It doesn't need applause, validation, or recognition. True strength is quiet. It's the ability to face your darkness and keep moving, to rebuild yourself in private, to rise even when no one is watching. People often ask how I became this strong person they see. They expect a story of sudden inspiration, of overnight success, of a dramatic breakthrough. They don't know, and I don't tell them. Because the truth is a messy, painful, beautiful journey that doesn't fit into their narratives. They never saw me struggle, and that's okay. They only saw me rise, and that's enough for them. But I know. I know the hours I spent crying silently. I know the nights I stared at the ceiling, questioning every choice I made. I know the days I felt invisible and the moments I convinced myself I wasn't enough. I know the fear that lived in my chest like a shadow, following me everywhere. I know the courage it took to rise despite all of that. And that knowledge, that quiet, unshakable understanding of my own resilience, is more valuable than any praise. I have also learned compassion for myself and for others. Because I know how easy it is to judge someone without knowing their story, to assume the rise was effortless, to overlook the silent battles they fought. Everyone has unseen struggles. Everyone carries a weight no one notices. And yet, some rise. Some survive. Some thrive. I am one of them. Now, when I face challenges, I do so with the memory of every struggle I endured. When doubt creeps in, I remind myself that I have risen before and I can rise again. When recognition comes, I accept it quietly, knowing it is the result of unseen labor, of perseverance in the dark, of choosing to keep going when giving up would have been easier. And sometimes, when I am alone, I allow myself to honor the struggle. I let myself remember the fear, the pain, the exhaustion. I let myself smile at the person I used to be and the journey I survived. That acknowledgement is private, sacred, and entirely mine. I don't need the world to understand. I don't need validation to feel complete. My strength is self-contained. My victories are measured by my survival, my growth, and the quiet pride that no one can take away. They never saw me struggle. But I did. I lived it. I endured it. I rose through it. and in that truth lies a strength that needs no audience, no applause, and no recognition. So now, I rise not for them, not for anyone else, but for me. I rise because I have chosen to. I rise because I remember the nights I almost gave up. I rise because every small step I took in the dark mattered. I rise because I know my worth, not because the world tells me, but because I built it from the fragments of my own courage. And that, above all else, is the real triumph. Because the world may never see the struggle. The world may only see the rise. But I see both. And that is enough.